Hey, everybody. I have a very special guest today. I have my daughter, Helena, here, and I wanted to have her on today because you've heard so much of my story and my side of things that I thought it would be great to hear her side of the story and just learn from her experience. We don't always get to understand what our kids are going through, but she was kind enough to come on here today and let me ask her some questions that will hopefully help you understand what your kids are going through and help you decide which approach is best for you when it comes to supporting your child and what's best for you and your family. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about her in case maybe this is the first podcast of mine that you've ever listened to. My daughter, Helena, she's 21 and she's living in sober living right now. And we've had quite a few ups and downs over the last, like 6 years. I think it's not really positive when things started with her addiction, but she was 14 or 15. I really started noticing things happening when she was about 15. I think that she was able to hide it pretty well before that. So we've had quite a few years of going through active addiction, and it's just been we've, gone on a long journey of, I think, healing together even before she got sober. And over the last 13 months, I think you've been living a very different life than you were living before. Even though you haven't been sober the whole time, you've really made huge changes in your life. And what's funny, so today on Google Photos, like it'll bring up a memory. And this day last year is the day that we were driving from Oklahoma City to rehab in Houston after you had left. And the pictures that came up were of us taking pictures in the car with me, you, and Honey. My daughter's dog is Honey. And I thought it was pretty cool that we were doing this podcast exactly 1 year later on that day. So I just want to thank you, Helena, for being willing to come on here and share with us today.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad to be here. And it's just, yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Well, first, I want to thank you because I don't know if you remember this or not, but do you remember me asking you permission to do this niche? Like, I was so nervous to talk to you beforehand because I wasn't sure if you would understand my intention with it. And we were sitting in the McDonald's parking lot, the one on Janeway and more. And when I asked you, I was so nervous. Do you remember this?
Yes, I do.
And I asked you how you felt about me working with parents who had a child struggling with addiction, because in order to tell my story, I would have to tell some of yours. And do you remember what you said?
Kind of, not really.
You tell me
I'd
you
have-
like the idea of everything that we had gone through helping other people.
That sounds about right. I mean, I remember what I felt. I didn't remember exactly what I had said. I was feeling halfway good and halfway not so good about it because at the time our relationship was not even close to as good as it is now.
Yeah.
And I was like, just hoping to God, like the wrong message did not get spread. And I wasn't, you know, I just wasn't sure of it yet. But I feel a lot differently now, of course.
Yeah. So what do you think about me doing this podcast?
I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to sit here like sober today and feeling as comfortable as I do and just hoping that, something can, come out of this and, just help other people. Like I've just always had a very like helpful heart and, just doing this is like, it's a blessing in itself that I'm like sitting here in the state that I am today with you. And our relationship is as amazing as it is today. Just all of it is, it's great.
It really is a blessing. It'll probably be, I don't know if I'm going to make it through all the way through this without crying because it just makes me so emotional. Just, it's huge. And especially like looking back at those pictures and seeing how much you've changed and what an emotional day that was. So, the story behind last year when when I said those pictures came up was she had been in rehab in Houston, and she had had an overdose in rehab. I think it was medication related. She hadn't actually taken anything, but I got a call that from the hospital, the rehab didn't call me and tell me. And so, and I was really confused when I got the call. I didn't know anything that had happened. And I was talking to like a nurse, and I thought I was talking to the rehab. I didn't even know she was in the hospital. And while this is happening, they're trying to get me to get her to stay. And I think they're trying to get me to get her to stay in rehab, but they're actually trying to get me to get her to stay in the hospital. And she's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And she left the hospital. I don't even think you had shoes, did you?
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
she didn't have shoes or anything. And so I just jumped in my car, and I live in Florida, driving there. I drove like all night, and she was outside of the rehab waiting for me when I got there, you were wanting to leave. You were like, that's it, I'm done. And so I ended up taking her back to Oklahoma City, and it was just this huge emotional like event of getting her back there. I had to stop. I don't even know how many times, like, because I felt like I couldn't even do it. I'd have to keep pulling over, feeling like I was sick. But I just also knew that I couldn't stop you. I knew what you were going to do. And so I dropped her off at the house that she had been living at. And then the next morning, thank God, you came over to my hotel with me and we talked like really openly. Like I was standing there naked and crying. I'd just gotten out of the shower. I'd started crying in the shower, and I got out and just was like, oh my gosh, and you were like, I made a mistake. I want to go back. And so that's what those pictures were. We were driving back. So it'd been a very, very emotional 24 hours, but it was like a huge, huge, like just such a great decision that you did that. So anyway, if anything that I ask makes you uncomfortable, you can say pass. Like I wouldn't blame you at all, but I'm not going to spring anything on you either. um, but so like yesterday we were talking a little bit, like, do you remember, like, I was always trying to convince you that your life was good,
Mhm.
right? Instead of just listening to that you were struggling, I was always coming at you with like, well, you just have such a great life and we have everything.
Mhm.
And do you remember like how that made you feel at the time? Because I think that's something a lot of parents do to their kids is try to convince them that things are better than they feel.
Yeah, I do remember. A lot of dark things were floating around in my head. One of them being like, I fucking hate her. She has no idea what she's talking about. She's blind to seeing what's going on. And I had like, but that wasn't like, I didn't hate you. I really genuinely just hated myself and my life. Like, I hated anything that had to do. I just, in you trying to make things seem like good, I didn't like anything good. And so I'm like, well, what the fuck does she have to be so happy about? I'm like, you know, like, it felt like the world was coming to an end for me. And so, like, anything that you had said, against that, the defense came up and I was really defensive. And, um, yeah, I felt such hatred, you know, towards you and my life in general. And I, that's a huge thing that I felt was just like hatred. And, I felt a little, yeah, I felt like I couldn't make you see what I was seeing, which is okay because, how in the world are you supposed to get into somebody's head and understand them whenever I wouldn't even really hardly talk to you, it would just come out, like I would lash out, and I really wouldn't, I wasn't even giving you really a chance to like understand how I truly felt. And I don't think that you were very much in touch with your emotions at the time as well. So I that made it even more difficult for you to see how my emotions affected me. You couldn't even really understand how your emotions were affecting you. So, you know, yeah.
Yeah, and I, looking back, know that the reason I was doing that was, you're right, I wasn't in touch with my emotions. I was totally numb. I was pretty, I would have said that I was conscious about things, but I was pretty unconscious. And because our life looked good on the outside and seemed successful,
Hmm.
at least from a financial standpoint,
Right.
we had all the things that everybody wants. I thought that we had a good life, but then, and also I needed you to be okay so that I could be okay. And so I kept trying to convince you to be okay instead of just listening to you. So I can only imagine how hard that is when you're trying to convey to somebody, like, hey, I'm in pain and you keep telling
Hmm.
me how great my life is.
Yeah. It was a very difficult time for everybody for sure. Um, you know, and I think about it's different. Like now I see things from a whole another perspective. So it is a little hard for me to like get into touch exactly with how I felt at that age. Um, yeah. It's just like I keep thinking like just only if I knew the things that I knew now, but maybe that just wasn't my path and that's okay.
So another thing, like in the beginning, was, I've said before, like I was trying to do whatever I could to help you, but a lot of the things that I was doing was making things worse, like dragging you to every doctor and counselor I could possibly find, making you do the martial arts when you didn't really want to do it. And you mentioned something about how you just wanted stability and guidance from me, but you weren't getting that.
Hmm.
Like, what did you feel
Yeah.
like you were getting instead of that?
Um, I didn't even know that was the thing. Like I was always trying to figure out what was going on through your head. Like I was like, does she not care? But then again, because I at the time I just couldn't see it. But I knew that you cared because you were trying to do all this stuff. But I'm trying to word this correctly. I felt like you were just at a loss of what to do, and I just didn't even want you to care. I I'm just like, why does she care? Why does she, you know what I mean? Like, just let me ruin my fucking life. Like, what does woman want for me? Like, you know? And
Did it feel like pressure?
yeah, yes, it did. It felt like a lot of pressure, and um, I was just having a war with myself constantly. Like, uh, but it was mostly a losing battle because I was just doing anything and everything I could to destroy my life, whether it was with an eating disorder, self-harm, using, just anything and everything. I was just on a total rampage to end my life in some way or another.
Yeah. And I could see it happening, but I felt completely powerless to do anything, which made me more panicked and less stable at a time that you needed me to be more stable. But it also set off this process of me wanting to help you so bad. Like, that's why I did everything initially. And that's what led me to figuring out how to become stable on my own so that I could be stable for you. But um so like before you moved out, there were times that, um, things that you did that you would have never done when you were sober, like stealing from the house
Right.
and selling that stuff. And I know that this is something that another thing parents really don't understand. Like when you were doing those kinds of things, what were you thinking? What was going through your mind at that time?
It sounds messed up, but I was like, these people owe me. Like, I'm like, you know, thinking like, oh, they intentionally put me all through these things, and um, you know, I was like, just telling my brain was just convincing me of any reason possible of why stealing from you guys was okay, so I could get high. And like, I mean, because that's all that money was going towards, and my brain still tries to do this to this day, even sober, like convincing me of why this won't work, of why my sobriety won't work. But you know
Yeah. So we'll go back to that in a second, like why your brain tries to convince you that sobriety won't work. But
Mhm.
um, so I know that parents spend a lot of time going over what they did wrong, trying to figure out what they could have done different. Like, do you think there's something I could have done different that would have stopped this from ever happening?
No, I don't, because um in a way I feel like I was like addicted before I was addicted. Like I remember in school being really young, like whenever they were passing out the dare bracelets, like to not do drugs, I was like, I'm definitely doing drugs. I mean, I was really young, like 10 years old, and I was just already planning to use before it ever happened. And, you know, um, so I think for me personally, I think there's like a chemical like imbalance there with like addiction some way, somehow. I don't really want to like speak too much about on that because I don't really fully understand it quite yet.
Yeah.
But um, so I feel like I was already on that path before any yeah, so I really don't believe whatsoever that you could have done anything different, so that this would have never happened,
Yeah,
because I mean, like some people, it's just how my brain is wired. I feel like, you know,
mhm.
I'm just a firm believer in, like, some people live way worse lives than me and choose not to be addicts and choose to do quite amazing things with their life. It's just, yeah, I feel like it was kind of just how I'm hardwired.
Yeah. Well, and there's times that I think it's hard not to think that, right? As a parent,
Mhm.
you wonder what you could have done differently. And I
Right.
think like if I had understood emotions for when you were little and like taught you how to process emotions and things like that, but then we would have been two totally different people. So it's hard to really know like would that have wired your brain differently? Like
Right.
never really know what would have happened. And so that also gets us stuck in the problem and not focusing on the solution and how, because that's where I was stuck for a long time. I never moved forward from that, was like, I got to figure this out so that I can fix it instead of like, how can I support this process now and help her get what she needs right now?
Right.
So okay, so we're talking about several of the things that I did like wrong, or not really, I don't know if wrong's the word, but just using the only coping skills that I had, which was basically numbness at the time. um so
Same
once I
here.
started what?
The same here.
True story, right?
Yeah.
So on the flip side of that, what did I do as like what was helpful to you? Like once I started changing, trying to approach things differently, what actually was helpful to you?
Um, I think it's whenever like the huge shift started happening, like whenever you started to like let go in a sense of like yes, like at the moment I was very upset. I'm like, yeah, but whenever you just started letting me lead my own life, of course, I was 18 at the time, so I could legally leave the house and stuff like that,
Yeah.
live where, but um, you just supported me in the sense of like, you know, telling me that I'm always you're always going to be here for me, like if I ever need to talk, but we are going to have to set healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
And in terms of like, say, whenever I asked you for money, you weren't getting money. You're like, I'll buy you groceries, like for you, bring the groceries to your house, but I'm not going to give you money for groceries.
She's air quoting.
Yeah. And, just setting healthy boundaries really helped. Of course, at the time, I was angry and was like, oh my God, she doesn't care. But, you know, that's just not, you're just trying not to feed my habit and be an enabler. There's a difference between like being an enabler and, just setting boundaries, you know.
Yeah, but you actually really responded well to it. You seem to be very understanding from pretty quick. Like you were, I don't know, it's almost like when I established boundaries for myself, I was able to bring some stability to our relationship
Mhm.
and finally be the parent and really be an emotional adult in the relationship. And maybe you were responding to that, but I felt like you were never even mad at me when well, there were times you got mad, but
Yeah.
but that was only like extreme circumstances, like where you were really either on Xanax or like really, really desperate. But for the most part, you responded really well to it. And it was surprising, which made it easier for me to, not all the time, but in the long run, I was like, okay, this process actually works. I was able to do it. Um, okay, so here's another thing. Like, I heard somebody, so I think I told you a little bit about the Safe Home podcast.
Mhm. Yeah.
And she brought this up, which I think was a really great point. So I wanted to ask you about it too. Like, one of the things that parents really wonder is why, like, why are kids doing this? Why are they abusing these substances? When on the outside, all I could see was the destruction in your life and how much it was hurting you. But obviously, you were getting something good out of it. Like when you first started, what were you getting out of it?
That feeling that I was searching for of like being able to breathe and like for me personally, I was just dealing with a lot of anxiety from a young age. Like I started having panic attacks whenever I was like 7. I will never forget the first time I had one. And after that I just started to really seek out anything that would numb that, suppress that, maybe not have to deal with that, like instant gratification, all of that. And so I remember the first time um, I was starting to use whenever I was like 13. Well, I mean, I started drinking actually younger than that, like probably like 11, 12 years old, 12
Well,
years old. And, um, you know, I thought I was just having fun. And like, I just was just so addicted to being numb and not having to feel like anything. And then it obviously got more serious and escalated very quickly. Like you know, I went from smoking weed for the first time when I was like 14 to shooting up heroin for the first time when I was 14. And I was willing to just do anything and everything that I could to just make me feel different. And even though it was creating chaos in the home, like I just remember, like I'd come home obviously high and we'd be arguing. You're like, I know this. I'm gonna drug test you, and I would be, until I was peeing dirty, I was still trying to convince you that I wasn't high, and it
and
would
then
just
you were
create,
trying to convince me there was something wrong with the drug test.
yeah, yeah, anything I could think of to say to get me out of that situation, so I could just, be left alone and be high, I would say it and do it. And it was just like I felt like whatever I had to do was worth it to be able to just, you know, be okay. But that didn't. It's not like that easy though. Like I know it sounds hard what I'm saying, but like it's just it's a living hell.
What's a living hell?
The whole lifestyle of drug use, alcohol use, whatever use, like whatever you're addicted to, it's just a constant, like it stops being fun. And like you may have times where you feel fine, but those are very short lasting times. They become
You
shorter and shorter until you're basically miserable no matter what because
do
you've
you,
given up everything.
do you remember when it stopped being fun and when it got miserable?
um I would say about whenever I started consistently shooting up heroin whenever I was like 17. And I remember I was in trouble with, the law. And I had done heroin like the night before my last um, court day and risked everything. Like, he could have, my probation officer could have drug tested me that night, that day, that
Yeah,
morning.
he thought about it.
And yeah. And he's like, and he didn't. And then I remember the judge saying, I think you're really going to be, I can't remember what he said. He said something like,
You're like a success story.
yes, a success story. He said something like that. I think you're going to be one of those success stories. And after I left that courthouse, I went and did heroin right away. And that's whenever things started getting really bad for me. Like I was living disgusting and every single way you can possibly think of. Like it was terrible. It was, yeah, it was not fun. And I remember the first time I ever got like dope sick, I was like walking through this like field to go get high. And I was just like, wow, like I'm starting to have to depend on this. I'm going to have to start doing some really bad things to keep this going. But I'm willing to do it because I need it. Like I can't live my life without drugs. And I would just remember that whole process of like that thinking going through my head. And like basically at that moment I knew I was like signing my life away, to the drug.
Or that you already had, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like sealing the deal. Like the deal that had already been written up, I was sealing it.
So the background is Helena had gotten in minor trouble, like really wasn't even in that much trouble for running away as a minor. And she didn't even really get arrested, but she resisted being put in the back of the police car and ran. And so she ended up being put on not really probation, but because she wouldn't comply with the what they wanted her to do, she ended up being put on full on probation. And we had to go to court. And this is the backstory of what she was talking about when she started using heroin. And this is what her brain was telling her was logical at the time. She had to quit smoking weed because if she was smoking weed, then it was going to show up on her twice a week drug test. But she could do heroin and plan it so that it didn't show up on your drug test, basically, right? So you were
Yeah.
able to pass your drug test because you kind of knew when they were going to be. And so, and here's the thing, I didn't see it at the time. I thought she was a success story too. But I remember that day, you and I had plans we were going to celebrate that you had finished and how great I thought you were doing. But you couldn't wait to get out of there. And you were like ditched our plans and you wanted me to drop you off at your friend's. And at the time, I had already that was when I had started releasing. You were almost 18 at that time. We had gone through you being on house arrest and everything. And so I let her go and I didn't find out until you weren't living at home anymore. I started noticing the black marks. I always just kept thinking,
Yeah.
like, why are her fingernails dirty? And why does she always have mascara all over her face? I didn't know that it wasn't mascara, that it was the marks from the heroin. And I didn't know that that was what was under your nails too. But, it was just like slowly after that, I started having these questions about it. But
Mm.
that thought process, I think, is really important to point out because, like, that's where our kids' thinking is. When they're going through this, they make a decision like, oh, I'm going to give up smoking weed and start smoking heroin instead, or injecting it. And sorry, I was freezing. I had to get the fan off me. But I think I also wanted to point out how you said you were addicted to being numb. And I've never used the words that I was addicted to being numb, but I said, like, I just wanted to be numb all the time. Like, that was my go-to emotion. It's so interesting how we were using different things to
Mhm.
feel numb all the time. Like,
Yeah.
and how important it was for me to see the similarities in us because I'd been so focused on our differences. I started focusing
Yep.
on our similarities.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when things, I think, started changing in our relationship a little too.
Yeah. I mean, like, I just thought about this, like, whenever you said that, like, how how different things might have been if we had just started seeing each other's similarities and like been there for each other, like, instead of just looking at our differences and how it'll never work and how I would just think the relationship would just never work.
Yes. Can remember you
And
saying that.
and like we're actually a lot alike,
Yeah, we are.
we really.
We're a lot
Yeah.
alike. We just use different sources to get to how we want to feel.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I used to be really like afraid of what your bottom was going to be, like what it was going to take for you to quit using. And I actually was really scared of how bad it was going to have to be. I didn't even know if it was ever going to get bad enough because for me on the outside, it felt really, really bad. But so I
Right.
was really surprised actually when you called me and told me that you wanted to go to rehab at that point. Like what was it that made you want to go? And two, is there anything that anybody could have done to make you want to go sooner?
um No, because the answer to the second question, if there's anything that anybody could have done to make me want to go sooner, is no, because that is so important to know, is that an addict will not get sober unless they want to. Like, it doesn't matter how much their family loves them and supports them and is there for them or anything like that. Like, it's a self thing, you know.
Yeah.
And that is just something that is a constant that I see, like, now. No one's going to get sober unless they personally are ready. And to answer the first question, I was, you know, doing some very degrading things to get money. And the house that I was living in just became really unsafe. And um, I really loved my roommate a lot. She was somebody that I still think about and worry about. And, even though we were using together, I genuinely like loved and cared for her. Like, but it just wasn't a safe environment. And I was making some enemies, you know, and things just started to become really unsafe. And I was starting to get a little worried. And I also had a dog that I really cared about as well. And I was really sick of disappointing everybody too. Like, I every time I talked to you and my grandmother, I could hear like how scared you guys were in your voices,
Yeah.
and you started to get closer, and everything was just kind of unfolding at once, like, and I would lay in my bed and I'd be, dope sick, of course, and just be like crying, and I'm like, God, dude, like this could all be over if I just go get sober. And just the thought just started coming up in my head. Like, I think it was the beginning stages of me starting to care for myself. Like, I wasn't nearly there yet, but I don't know, something just shifted inside of me where like I felt like I deserved a second chance in myself. Like, um, and I feel that way now. Like at the time I didn't see that. Like, I wasn't convinced that I was doing it for myself yet. I just knew that I was tired and I was sick and I was just felt disgusted in myself and the environment around me. Um, that I was creating for myself, you know.
Yeah.
I'm like, finally got what I wanted. I fucking have been destroying my life left and right, and there's not much more to go. And I saw the future ahead of me a few times. I saw all the potential things that were about to happen, and I knew I needed to get out of there. And the only way to do that was to get sober because I couldn't leave the state without getting sober. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now there's just no option. And so I finally did. I finally called you and was like, well, okay, well, first I also had a point where I was like, all right, maybe if I call my mom and tell her I want to get sober, she might give me some money because I'm really sick right now. Fuck, I gotta commit now. I was like, I gotta commit. I was like, because I was like trying to tell everybody, I was like, I will not go without if I'm sick. And then you know, I ended up not being sick anymore. And then I'm like,
Well, I'll admit right here, to be honest, because I was actually talking to a mother about this the other day who was feeling guilty about it. And I've never shared this before, but I think it's important to share that I sent you money at that time, knowing that it certainly wasn't for groceries. And, but I knew that that was what it was going to take to get you to rehab. And
mhm,
I stand by that decision, to do whatever it took to get you there. And
yeah,
I also like jumped on a plane with it and was there within like 4 hours of you getting that call. I made you call the rehab first.
yeah,
You called and you had actually done it. I was,
yeah,
committed to getting you there. So I know I appreciate that you were going to not share that and like protect me in that. But I think it's important for me
mhm,
to share that I did that because I know other parents that have done it and feel really guilty about it. And I don't feel guilty about it because I think I look at it as like it was just one thing on the list of getting you to rehab.
yeah. And of course, that's not going to happen every time. Like, that's not going to happen with everybody. Like, addicts will say and do everything that they can to get their next fix, but you know,
I could see that change in you. And the other thing that was happening was you kept getting sick at that time, like cellulitis. You kept having to go in the
yeah,
hospital. You were in a lot of pain.
that was another thing that really like traumatized me a little bit. Like, you know, being in the hospital for like 3 or 4 days, like, you know, I felt like I was literally dying. I had like cellulitis in my hand. My hand swelled up so big, like it just looked like an elephant hand, and
I remember.
it was bad. And yeah, um, it was very scary. I felt really alone because I could have moved with my mom to Florida, and the only reason why I didn't was because I was using,
Right.
and I had no family there. I was like, man, like I left the hospital early feeling like absolute just shit. And because I needed to go get high. And I was like, dude, I feel like I was like, I could have died and like no one would have been around. Like it was bad. And I'm like, all of those things like led up to me, you know. I was feeling a little schemy whenever I admit I was scheming whenever I called my mom telling her I want to go to rehab and I need a little bit of money. But I was like, I can't disappoint her. I know I was like, I can't, you know, I have to go through with this. I feel like if I had kept using longer and longer and longer, my soul would have not been much like as present in that moment, you know, like if
Right.
I was using, if it had been like in a few years, I probably would have just tried and scammed my mom and not gone, but you know, I don't know.
So, there was something else I wanted to bring up. Oh, me leaving. So that was really the hardest decision, like
Mhm.
really, really hard. But I came to the conclusion that if me being there was helping you, I would have stayed. But I
Yeah.
didn't feel like it was, that was really kind of like my deciding factor to be able to leave. Do you think that me just not being there for you on a daily basis played any part in you deciding to go to rehab at that point?
Yes and no, because I don't know. I don't think so because I was just on such a destructive path and getting involved in really bad things that that lifestyle, like, you know, getting cellulitis in my hand from, you know, injecting and missing and stuff like that. That everything just kind of came together. Maybe that probably was a part of it. Um, you know, because yeah, it probably was just a little bit. And you know, that's what you needed. You needed to move there and like you were actively trying to do something for yourself, you know? And
Yeah.
I think seeing that was like I understood and I was just so happy in our relationship. Like just whatever you were doing that was, you know, helping you like heal yourself. Um, you know, that was yeah.
You were
That
supportive.
yeah, that just that made me really happy to see. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this.
That's okay. So after that, you relapsed a couple of times. What did you learn when you were relapsing? Because I think that sometimes people, I look at this journey as like over the last year, you've made incredible changes in your life. Each
Mhm.
time you've done better. And I know sometimes that's really hard for people. They see it as just a total loss and starting over when they
Mhm.
relapse. But I know you've learned from relapsing. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned?
So yeah, I just had to try it out again, you know. Um like what I was talking about earlier, like my brain just convinces me of every reason why being sober won't work and like I was just I wasn't really I was learning each time that I wasn't dealing with like my mental health and like, you know, trauma and um because you have to be mentally stable to lead a strong recovery. Like you just have to lead a strong recovery. Like yes, you can be sober and um you know, be abstinent from the drugs, but if you're not healthy mentally, then you're just it's not a good life to live. It's not it's just important in any aspect, using or not, your mental health is very important.
So do you think you
Um
learned to prioritize that?
yeah, I learned to prioritize that. I learned to like love myself enough to try and stay sober one more time like um and it was just a huge reminder of, you know, using is not glamorous whatsoever. Um, you know, I was trying to like romanticize using and like how good it is and whatever, like how I'm not gonna have to feel this way anymore. But you still feel those feelings and they're actually intensified when you're using, like, you know, all
Yeah.
those feelings.
Yeah.
And
Um, and I love that you bring out the mental health and loving yourself because when you said when we were, I think it was yesterday or the day before, we were talking about how you were going to invest the money in yourself to see Jana every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
and you were like, this is my fucking life. And I'm going to spend this money on it. I was like, hell yeah. Like, that was the best thing that I ever heard you say. And that's like something I've thought before too. Like, I only have one life. And if I have to see a counselor and have a coach and a this and a that, then, I'm going to do it all because I get one life and I want to enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what makes you feel supported? Like either what I do or what you wish I would do, or what makes somebody in recovery feel supported?
Mm, just doing it, like, even if you don't understand like addiction and stuff like that, at least trying to. Like, I admire that and I appreciate that whenever somebody's at least trying to understand the mindset instead of like being judgmental.
Yeah.
Um, because that's a huge one, and like looking down on somebody because everybody has a vice, you know? Like, don't try to act, a certain way. Like, I'm not saying the way I'm living is great, but yeah, don't try to look down on somebody, And like the patience that you give me, I appreciate more than anything. Like, I've gone through some major mood swings in the first few months of recovery, and you know, just just your love, like, it's and being real with me and honest, because that's something that crave and need, is the realness, the raw truth of something, you know? Because like I might not yeah, those
That's
things.
something that was hard for me to do for a long time, to be that vulnerable and like
Yeah, ability, yeah.
and raw and honest with you. I think that day that I'm standing there naked in front of you crying when you before you went back to rehab, like I'd just been in the shower. I start crying in the shower and I'm like, I was feeling like it was my fault that you left. Like if I hadn't have come, you wouldn't have left. And so I get out of the shower and I'm just like standing there naked, water dripping off me, crying, like, I feel like this is my fault. But being that vulnerable, then you were vulnerable and you're like, Mom, I think I made a mistake. I want to go back. And I'm like, well, let's go. And so it was a great lesson for me. I'd been trying to be vulnerable before that, but I
Mhm.
just keep getting more and more. And then I think that it's also really just helped make us closer when I do share my real self with you. But I think
Mhm.
there's this thing like moms don't do that, these conditioning that we get, that
Yeah.
how moms are supposed to act. And I just have had to throw that totally out the window.
Yeah, it's important because yeah, that's a really good topic to bring up, is about how, moms are supposed to be and how things are supposed to be. Like, yeah, that's a very good thing to bring up.
Okay, so is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to share?
Mm, I don't believe so. Um, I don't want to make it seem like um, I'm just suddenly like here and I'm blessed and I'm happy, and like this was hell to get here. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, it's not gonna be an easy road, but it's a road sure worth going down and at least trying, you know, to get through it. Like, um, yeah. But I definitely am thankful though that I at least gave myself a chance, for sure.
I'm grateful too. And I think that it's really important to, yeah, I'd like to acknowledge how hard you've had to work for this, that this was not easy for you, that you have really had to fight for yourself, and
Yeah.
that just removing the substances does not fix anything. And that, like, I've got to work on myself and my own stability so that I can be supportive of you working through your, like, we're both really basically working on the same things,
Hmm.
loving
And like
ourselves.
like if, for people who like ever feel like ashamed or guilty or whatever, like any person who is getting sober is going to feel those feelings. And like, just having accountability is okay. But, you have to, find some way to move past that and surround yourself with people who can help you move past that as well. Like that's very, very important to like, it's not just the drugs that are addicting for some people, it's also the lifestyle. So like you gotta make sure that, you're creating a new, better lifestyle that isn't anything like the old one, because that will just suck you right back in.
Yeah, I think that's important for parents too, right? Like we have to do the same thing. We have to
Yeah.
surround ourselves with people who are emotionally healthy and so that we can create new habits. I
Hmm.
really, really appreciate you doing this. I know like you had to go back and face, think about times that were unpleasant. And I know that that is not easy. To me, it feels like a lifetime ago, like it's hard for me to
Yeah.
believe that I was that person.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing was just remembering. Like my memory from like using and trying to block things out is very, very bad. So it was a little hard for me to put myself back in that mindset, and think about how I was thinking then, because I am a very different person today than I was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's hard, you know, which is a very like fucking awesome thing to say, because I never would have thought I'd be saying those words, that I've changed my thinking patterns, changed my habits, like starting to love myself, care for myself and others, like, and have the capacity to care for others, you know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's, yeah, it's pretty cool.
It is. I love watching it. I'm so, so proud of you. I can't even, express how proud of you I am and how grateful I am that you're sober today and that we have the relationship that we have and that we could even have this open conversation and hopefully there's some things that come out of it that help parents understand their kids a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing we're having this conversation as well. Without me trying, just how I would be in the old days, like just,
Oh,
you
this would
know,
have been a great chance for you to just tell me
rip.
all the things you didn't like about me.
Oh, I
So,
know.
well, thank you. And I really love you and I appreciate you doing this.
Of course. I love you too, Mom.